Hi, and welcome to History's a Blast. The East Broad Top Railroad's historic shops and roundhouse that visitors see today in Rock Hill Furnace, Pennsylvania, have looked like that since the mid-1930s. But the railroad first arrived in 1874. What happened over the next 60 years? Come along as I take a deep dive into the archival record to find out. I've been a serious student of the East Broad Top for about 35 years, but my attraction to the place goes back to childhood when in 1960 my maternal grandmother, Desi Locke, who grew up over the mountain, as EBT country was known to expatriates living in neighboring Franklin County in those days, heard that they were going to reopen the railroad one last time for the annual homecoming week before tearing it up. Turns out the grandma had ridden the EBT in her wedding dress on that day in 1913 on her way to Huntington County Courthouse, and she wanted to ride it one last time. So off we went. The place got under my skin, and it was a rare summer that I and a growing band of siblings didn't make the trip in the family car to ride that train. Military school and an Army career spent far away from my native South Central Pennsylvania intervened, until 4 years at the Pentagon in the early 90s brought me close enough to reconnect to the EBT and serve on the board of the Friends of the East Broad Top and in other volunteer capacities for that organization. A lot of historical water has flowed under the bridge since then, to mix metaphors. Until today, I'm privileged to be designated an EBT scholar by the EBT Foundation, and I can truly say that the view from the Chief Engineer's office is special sometimes. This is all by way of saying that although I have benefited from recent access to the precious archives being conserved by the EBT's Orbizonia station staff, what I say in this video is mostly the result of years of independent research in archival collections held by other entities, and in no way reflects the official position of the EBT Foundation or the Friends of the East Broad Top. So let's get started. The Rock Hill Shop Complex had essentially taken its present form by 1917, when the railroad produced a set of valuation maps mandated by the Interstate Commerce Commission, from which this detail comes. The FEBT has a complete set, as do I, through a long-ago purchase from a private owner, and with FEBT's cooperation, it is also available to view on the railsandtrails.com website, link in the description. More or less everything there today is on this map, except the brick lean-to on the end of the roundhouse toward the yard tracks. It would be added in 1933 to house the buses of the EBT Transit Company, whose first bus barn, attached to the left end of the paint shop, had burned down, making it necessary to rebuild the paint shop, shown here, with mine rail rafters and a metal roof. By the way, that fire was the second and last on record in the shops complex. Hold that thought. We'll come back to the topic of fire shortly. In the upper right corner is the concrete coal bunker for fueling locomotives. Now, it didn't exist in 1917, though, so this map has had a few changes made. In 1917, there would have been a coaling trestle about here, which the railroad had built a decade earlier, and before that, fueling engines was done the old-fashioned way, at a trackside platform. Okay, I'm going to flip this 180 degrees so the view conforms with the next map I'm going to show you. There are three sets of historical sources that allow us to set the Wayback Machine to 1874 and piece together a series of pictures showing how the shops complex probably originated and evolved over the next 35 years or so. The Sanborn Mapping Company produced 3 fire insurance maps of the Rock Hill furnaces and the EBT shops between 1894 and 1911. These are publicly available on the Library of Congress website with a link in the description below. Critical as they are for the purposes of this video, they don't show how things changed as much as what had changed since 1874 and during the intervening years. Now, to fill in those blanks, there are two groups of historical documents. First and foremost, the minutes of the meetings of the EBT Board of Directors, which as of March 2024, the hard-working archival staff at Orbizonia Station has started to make available to the public as digital images in the EBT Foundation's online database, along with free downloadable PDF indexes prepared by yours truly. And there's a link in the description to that website as well. But for many years, scholars, including again yours truly, made do with the so-called Heart Notes, 53 pages of handwritten notes from the minutes books scrawled in a legal-sized tablet in 1965 by railroad preservationist and in 1971 the first director of the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania, George M. Hart, as our only source of information on the history of the shops. The originals are in the EBT collection of the Railroad Museum in Strasbourg. A photocopy is the source of my knowledge on the shops, and having indexed the original books from which they're taken, I can attest to their accuracy. Now, gaps do exist in the minutes, and they can be narrowed, though, if not filled, with news items fed to local weekly newspapers from the period, which are fortuitously preserved on microfilm in the Beagley Library at Huntington's Juniata College. Now that the preliminaries are out of the way, let's finally get started on those Sanborn maps. We'll start by backdating the 1894 map. Oops, there's a slight error that needs to be corrected. Can you see it? No? The roundhouse has 7 tracks leading into it. There were only 6. There, fixed. Now, there's an old legend based on oral tradition that these shops started as replacements for a mythical shops that burnt down in 1882. A guidebook published in the 1970s, not the one currently sold in the EBT gift shop, thank goodness, even dated the fire to January of that year. The legend persists despite the lack of any record of the fire in local newspapers in an era when a cow getting killed on the tracks showed up in print. Here's how the railroad's president, Ingham, introduced his report to the directors for the month of January 1882, and I quote, "Nothing requiring special notice has occurred during the month," unquote. You'd think he'd have mentioned the destruction of the company's shops, wouldn't you? Yeah, me too. More on that later, but for now let's get back to the maps. This map shows what the Rock Hill shops looked like to a Sanborn surveyor in late 1894. 20 years after the railroad arrived, at which date we know from the director's minutes that the scene was much different. Here's the likely scene from 1874 through about 1880. The blue structure is the stone house that was there when the EBT bought the property. The roundhouse, built in the summer of 1874, had only 4 stalls. The board authorized its construction of brick with a slate roof. And to allow for easy expansion when needed, the west wall was only 1 brick thick. The scar of that wall is still visible inside the column between stalls 4 and 5, looking from right to left, from when that expansion finally occurred in 1887. What? No machine shop? Nope, no machine tools of any kind. There must have been a car repair shop and probably the blacksmith shop because in 1879, Superintendent A.W. Sims reported that all repairs to rolling stock, which consisted of wooden cars with wrought iron and cast iron fittings, were done in the shop. It's not known for sure when the big structure labeled car shop next to the turntable was built, so I've kept it where it will be in 1894. There was no foundry yet. Iron castings were made over at the blast furnace, and Sims complained about not being able to control the quality from cast to cast. Sims complained a lot. Maybe that's what drove his son William to join the Navy. Sims complained long and hard about the lack of a machine shop, and Mr. Ingham was on his side. When a locomotive needed major repair for overhauling, the EBT had to ship it back to Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, a process that was expensive both in time and money. Later, they got the PRR, the Pennsylvania Railroad, to do the repairs in their Altoona shops, but still at a heavy cost. Even car wheels, whose usefulness could have been extended if the EBT had a wheel lathe to take out the flat spots, which were caused by braking on heavy grades, had to go to scrap, along with the axles, to be replaced by newly purchased ones. Self-sufficient the EBT was not. The lack of machine tools cost the EBT a lot of money that, quite frankly, it didn't have in those hard financial times, and Mr. Ingham made a point of that to the board whenever he had the chance. Finally, in 1881, the directors did feel rich enough, in the words of Mr. Ingham, to purchase some used machine tools, which Mr. Sims set up temporarily in the roundhouse in July. They came from a foundry and machine shop, probably the firm of William Merrick in Foundryville, just outside the village of Jeddo in northeastern Pennsylvania's anthracite coal region, which, and this is important to the creation of the Rock Hill Shop's fire legend, had suffered a fire. Now, Jeddo and its surrounding township was the bailiwick of coal baron George B. Markle, who, wait for it, was a director of the EBT. Gentlemen, I think I know where we can find an entire machine shop, cheap. Now, the existing repair shop building wasn't large enough to house all the tools, so a new building, the core of the present shops, would be needed. Construction started in July, and only a few weeks before a heavy storm blew in the west wall of the roundhouse, doing some slight damage to a locomotive but apparently missing the machine tools. The process seems to have taken longer than anticipated. President Ingham reported the new shop about finished in mid-November, erected, furnished with machines, and making some money from jobs for outside parties in January, but again nearly completed in March and again about finished and fitted up in April 1882. It was completed and running by June. Now, I admit that there could have been a fire in January that caused a hiccup in getting the machine shop up and running for good, but no report to the board and nothing about it in the newspapers. The old adage, if they didn't write it down, it didn't happen, applies. I recommend reading the story for yourselves in EBT Foundation's online database. In 19th century cursive. Trust me, it'll be fun. The next big addition came in 1887 with the foundry completed, finally, and making a profit, doing work for the EBT's sister iron and coal company as well as other customers. As I've already mentioned, the roundhouse expansion to 6 stalls took place that year as well. And that's where things stood except for the addition of more machine tools and a new steel turntable sometime during the 1890s, for 10 years or so. Things really started to happen in 1904, under the leadership of Robert Samuel Siebert, who served as general manager and president from 1903 through his untimely death 10 years later. Young Robert Siebert had been the EBT's Mount Union agent in the beginning, but he left to make his fortune as a railroad man out west. He returned in 1903 with a proposal to lease the railroad, which the boards of both the railroad and its sister iron and coal company turned into an offer to become general manager of both companies. In a few months, Siebert was a director, president, and general manager, and it was off to the races, so to speak, everywhere on the EBT. A 4-page weekly newspaper, the Huntington Globe, kept a running tally of improvements in the Rock Hill shops. A new track scale in the Lengthen Carpenter, aka car shop. In January, the EBT was now in the business, by the way, of building its own wooden rolling stock. Filling in the grassy areas in the yard and around the shops with crushed blast furnace slag in order to quote the Globe's Orbazonia correspondent, who one suspects was none other than Mr. Siebert, to do away with the intolerable nuisance of the free-range livestock. And that happened in May. A boiler shop next to the old car shop, now the paint shop, at the turntable in June, and a water plant with standpipes to replace the old tank by the end of the year. The electric light plant that visitors can see in that small addition near the stationary steam engine came in November 1905, and an extension to the machine shop was underway by December. By the way, note the 3 tracks oriented on the turntable so a locomotive could pass directly over it into a stall. The newer locomotives were apparently too long to fit on the turntable, so the new track arrangement allowed it to be used as a bridge. Too long and too heavy. The definitive book on EBT history by Lee Rainey and Frank Kuiper, sadly out of print now, says the old turntable collapsed under the weight of one of the big engines to be replaced by one made of steel. It's uncertain when that happened, but it seems to have been during a period of hard financial times in the mid-1890s, probably after the earlier map was made. At any rate, this track plan was about to change, because the 1905 shop extension meant that turntable lead had to move, and several buildings along with it. New machine tools, the big lathe, wheel lathe, and others that are still there today arrived in February 1906, as construction of the new station building was about to get underway across Meadow Street. Toward the end of November, the first of the two Babcock and Wilcox boilers with its 90-foot tall stack was installed, and 2 months later the Globe published a list of more new machines ordered for the car, boiler, and machine shops. The present boiler shop, the locomotive shop extension of the machine shop, and changes to the car shop change in August 1907, and in October, reported the Mount Union Times, the B&B, or Buildings and Bridges crew, tore down the old sand house and built the new one where it stands today. Then they moved the freight office and adjacent warehouses to their present sites on the east side of the yard, where they'd be more convenient to customers. Now, with the freight office out of the way, there was room for the cutoff track to go in, the pattern shop to be added to the foundry, and the electric repair shop next door. While they were at it, the track crew moved the track scale out of the car shop to its present location next to the foundry. And one final change to the shop's landscape came in September 1908, when the paint shop burned down, with newly rebuilt and painted locomotive number 7 inside and heavily damaging the old car shop. Interestingly, this fire, which was documented in the Weekly Globe, was remarkably similar in its circumstances to the legendary fire of 1882, which supposedly also damaged a trapped locomotive and also received no attention in the President's report to the board. Its only reference in the minutes came as a cryptic reference to paint shop reconstruction in the Treasurer's report on expenses for equipments and betterments in October of the following year. But then in 1908, the damages were insured. They would not have been in 1882, or there would have been a Sanborn map for that period. So much for fires. The third Sanborn map, and last one, shows these things essentially as they are today. The second boiler and stack came in August 1911, as recorded by the Mount Union Times. I said essentially. The roundhouse didn't look like this when they made this map. A photo in the EBT Foundation's archives, which I can't show because I don't have the right to publish it in YouTube, shows the roundhouse with its present roof lines, but still only with 6 stalls and not enlarged to its present size, and this was before the installation of the second boiler. That enlargement would occur, according to the director's minutes, in 1917, 2 years after the present turntable was installed, to finally accommodate the first 3 big Mikes or Mikados that inhabit the roundhouse to this day. So there you are. And that's how the EBT shops came to be. At least that's my story, and I'm sticking with it for the time being. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll look at some of our other ones. Bye for now.